welcome again to another edition of the Brotherhood Remnant podcast. And boy, do we have a treat for you today. I have once again with me Rob Carr, who is our resident Brotherhood expert. That means that no one else has stepped forward to take that
mantle. Is that a good word? Mantle?
Well, mantle has a mixed history in the Brotherhood world. So let's just say title.
There's a lot of inside stuff.
There's
so
a
we
lot
won't go
to unpack there, and we will one day. In fact, we might ask Jim Williams about that at some point.
There you go.
All right. Okay. Let's get this thing started. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to share my screen because we have a lot to talk about.
Yes.
And we might as well just get on with it. All right. Hopefully you can see that.
Yes.
And let me just kind of give us a little background now, and I'm just going to unleash the Rob Carr. Okay. We wanted to remind everyone of some ways that you can get in touch with us. Okay. Both Rob and I have access to the Brotherhood Commission at gmail.com email address. And yes, I did secure that more than 15 years ago. So no one else can have it. And another thing that I wanted, actually, these are kind of out of orders, but I'm going to jump down to the bottom one. And we want everybody to go and check out our blog. And that is brotherhoodremnant.blogspot.com. And that thing has actually thing's been running now for, since 2008 or 7 or 8. I need to go look and confirm that. I keep saying 2 different years, but it's been up there a while. Now, has it been updated all that much? No, but it has physically existed on the World Wide Web. Now, the last thing I want to share with everybody is if you are like Rob Carr, or I guess to some extent Tim Yarbrough, and you just want to deep dive into the history of Brotherhood, and you want to go back and resurrect old magazine files and photos and books and dissertations and just everything Brotherhood, you can go to this tiny URL that we set up that goes straight to our Google Drive. Okay. And it's a read only, but you can download. So it's very useful to those that would like to do this. It's tiny. It's https://tinyurl.com/brotherhood abbreviated BHD files. Okay. And that'll take you directly into the world of what we have created so far in Brotherhood files and archives. Okay. These will reside in other places probably at some time in the future, but right now this is where they are. Okay, Rob.
Yes.
We're going to talk tonight. Let me get us going here. Oops. Let's move to the next slide here.
Absolutely.
And we are going to talk about origins and beginnings of Brotherhood. Now, we've already kind of touched on this in past podcasts, but Rob has some new information that he would like to share with everyone. And I really appreciate the research that Rob's done on this. And Rob, just take it away.
I will do it. Thank you, Tim.
One final thing.
Okay.
Rob wears these shirts. He's kept every shirt he's ever owned, apparently, from Brotherhood days. I have not. I have an Acts 1-8 challenge shirt, and that's about it.
That's about it.
I did find something in our china cabinet.
Oh, yes. There. Look at that. Look at that.
World Changers Crew Chiefs Cup from 91. That proves the fact that at least I was in the room when World Changers was going in 91. So anyway.
I have to add this, Tim. I actually have, although I will not wear it for error, because first of all, it's gotten too small, but I actually have a pair of World Changers pajamas.
Oh,
they actually
God.
had done
there was underwear.
I am not modeling that.
You
but I will take
a
picture of it. I will take a picture.
When kids used to wear underwear?
Oh, man.
You remember that out
Yes.
and open?
Yes.
We had some Brotherhood some World Changers underwear. I'm almost certain.
Well,
and I think they sold really well. by the way.
We'll have pictures, but I'm not modeling. So let's just get that cleared up right now for
We
everybody.
appreciate it.
Tim, let me just also say a couple things, and I'm not here to take up, but we're setting the stage because eventually we will not be having as many of these little extra commercials because part of this is all new. I also want to thank those of you who have already made contributions and suggestions in the podcast that we did with JT Henderson. I actually had a PowerPoint that did not represent what I was saying. I went back and checked as someone asked me to. I found out that my words were correct, but the PowerPoint was not. So I corrected that. I sent it back to Tim. It's in the remnant files. So it will be corrected for you all there. So thank you for that. Keep the comments and suggestions coming. Let's get right into this because we've got a lot to cover, and I want to be sure we get into this. Brotherhood and origins. Obviously, Scripture says there's a time and place for everything under heaven, and one of them is there's a time to be born and a time to die. I'm not trying to be morbid, but there are ebbs and flows of anything, including things like Baptist Brotherhood, which we obviously know. So with that said, let's move on to the next slide, Tim, because what we have is 3 phases of brotherhood work starting in 1907 when it was originally called the Layman's Missionary Movement. And I'm going to spend some time on that particular point. But I also want to make you aware that in 1927, the name was changed to the Baptist Brotherhood of the South. And then in 1950, it was changed to the Brotherhood Commission. I give this information to you because you will find in Tim's and my interaction, and as we have other people come to visit with us, you're going to hear these terms and they may interchange. And I just didn't want to confuse people like, well, they got a lot of names here, but this is the sequence and this is how it was all determined and entitled. And so I just wanted you all to see that there. So with that said, I want to get to the dedication. This man right here, who I knew personally for many years growing up in Illinois, and he would actually come to our church and do the January Bible study. His name is Archie Brown. And for many, many years, as you can see on the PowerPoint, he was pastor at First Baptist Church, Vandalia from 1954 to 1978. Prior to this time, he was at Southwestern Baptist Seminary, and Archie did a doctoral thesis. He was getting his doctorate in religious education, and it was called The History of the Baptist Brotherhood of the South. And I want you all to know, and by the way, Tim, this PDF is on the remnant file, so people can literally look this up, fact check us if they want to, or it's a great place to do research. I cannot even begin to touch everything that's in there. It's over 300 pages. What Archie said, even in his introduction, he said, what's interesting about this dissertation is it was hard to do, not because there was so little information, but I kind of smiled. He said it was hard to do because there was so much information. This man perused over 500 manuals, bulletins, SBC annuals. He talked to people. This man did an incredible job from its origins up to 1950. And it's worth the read. It's a little detailed. You'll find a lot of stuff in there from your own particular state that's of interest. We won't be able to cover it all, but I find this to be a great thing. Now, my intention is to, in this podcast, is to give you some understandings from my perspective and my experience and my history, and try to couple that with Dr. Brown's thesis to see how things came about as the origins of the Layman's Missionary Movement came into being. So we owe a lot to him. And this is interesting, Tim, and for our listeners, a lot of people who knew this man personally did not know he did this dissertation. It was almost as if he did it, he put it away. I never heard him talk ever about it. And I was state brotherhood director from 89 to 98. He was still alive. I think he died in the early 2000s. I visited with him, never knew it until later when I came to the NAM and was serving there. And then we were going through some history, and I found this dissertation and I thought, wow, if I could have just talked to him about it.
Yeah, I have started reading it, and it is fascinating. It gives a history of tracing brotherhood back to its essence, its origin.
Oh, yes.
And he goes through the Crusades. He goes through Reformation. I mean, it's amazing what he does. We need to move on.
Yes, we do. Okay. Well, we're gonna do what is traditionally been what I call the traditional understanding of how uh, the layman's missionary movement, which became Brotherhood Commission, got started. Two men with one vision, Joshua Levering and William Northon. I didn't misspell that. It's Northon, and I actually had a spell check on this, but it's proper. Northon is his name. These two gentlemen came together, spoiler alert, with some other men, but it came to pass that this was started. So I want to talk to you a little bit about these men and what led up to what was going on. Brotherhood work, the layman's missionary movement, was not a spontaneous outpouring of one or two or just, a couple of people who just said one day they woke up and said, let's have a missionary movement of men. This has got some roots to it that Dr. Brown talks about. So I want to talk to you a little bit about these two men. We're going to start with Joshua Levering. And if you want to move to the next slide, you'll see some things here. He was born in 1845. He died in 1935. Look at his pedigree of what he was. He was a trustee president. He was president within the trustee groups at Southern Seminary. There's actually a building named after him because I attended Southern. I was one of the Levering building. That's an interesting thing. He was also three-term president of the SBC from 1908 to 1910. He was, now this is interesting too. I love the side stuff. He was candidate for governor of Maryland and the U.S. president under the prohibition ticket.
Whoa.
So he was in this ticket, and he had these candidacies. Now, here's what's interesting. Prior to the layman's missionary movement within the Southern Baptist Convention, he actually assisted in launching the international layman's missionary movement in 1906 in New York City. So he was all over the place. When I told Tim of his pedigree, he was going, no wonder this guy was just amazing with all that he did. And I probably didn't touch everything, but this gives you a little taste of this guy's interest in layman. He was a layman himself, and he had all of these leadership backgrounds that would have been a natural for him to start looking at that. William Northon, a little bit older. He actually was in the Confederate Army as a lieutenant, but he was born in 1835. He died in 1913. He was in the Georgia House and Senate from 1877 to 1885. He was president of the Agricultural Society, as you can see there. He was also Georgia governor from 1890 to 1894. What makes him interesting was he was considered a progressive, Tim, because he was anti-lynching. He did not believe that vigilantes ought to go out and lynch people. Now, you could get hung in a legal sense, if you were convicted, but you just didn't go out and grab people and hang them up in a tree. Okay. Yeah. He was simultaneously, this man, these guys were never idle. He was simultaneously president of the Georgia Baptist Convention from 1899 to 1902. And at the same time, he was president of the SBC 1899 to 1901. Okay.
Busy fella.
He was very busy. And which is, a lot of people don't know this because I looked this up on Wikipedia and I trust it. He was editor of Men on the Mark in Georgia from 1906 to 1912. I have never seen this publication, but I hope maybe somebody can find it or we can look it up one day and find it. Men on the Mark, and there. Okay. Now, as Tim said, Dr. Brown's material goes all the way back to the Bible. I said, we don't have time for all of that because most of us know scriptures. Jesus called laymen, they were fishermen, tax collectors. Jesus got laymen involved from the get-go, in his ministry as he gets men involved. And then ultimately they became the evangelists and the missionaries that literally started spreading churches. Okay. I lost you here. What happened? I think okay, we're there. Okay. So as Tim noticed, men have a sense of fraternity. They like the idea of Christian brothers gathering together, whether it was going back to Crusades, which I didn't go back that far, but Christian brothers love to gather together to pray, evangelize, protect each other, and do benevolent work. These represent three movements that were going on prior to the layman's missionary movement. In 1728, the Brotherhood of Oxford Men. There was Oxford University in England. Men began to get together. They used the term brotherhood, but it was to pray and to talk about missions and see what they could do to be more than just students. They wanted to be active in terms of sharing the gospel. 1806, is the famous haystack prayer meeting that most of us talk about, because Brotherhood kind of launched from that. Remember 1806, that's going to become very important in this. But there was a haystack prayer meeting in New England, I believe, and there were a group of students who prayed literally under a haystack to be involved in foreign mission work. Okay, so it kind of started the whole foreign mission movement from this one activity. And then, as we know, in 1844, YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, came about, and it was involved because a lot of men who were going into the army were just, they didn't have any place to exercise their Christian beliefs. And because of the YMCA, this was a place you could go to be safe, and you got out of trouble and you didn't get into difficulties and things like that. So what I'm saying is, these were kind of things that men were involved in prior to the layman's missionary movement. Okay. As we look at it, in the 19th and 20th century movements, you had denominations who were developing a type of layman's movement. 1883, the Brotherhood of St. Andrew. I'm not going to express these because, again, we don't have time. And Dr. Brown's thesis goes into all these particular, but you can look at these and see you've got the Methodist Episcopal, the Wesleyan, the Presbyterian, the interdenominational movement, the Northern Baptist Layman's Missionary Movement. All of this was going on just before and prior to the Layman's Missionary Movement within the Southern Baptist Convention. In 1906, you remember that date of 1806? That was the haystack prayer meeting, okay? In the centennial in 1906, there was a man by the name of John Selman. I hope I got his name pronounced right. He was sitting in Ryman Auditorium. Tim, you're familiar with Ryman Auditorium, aren't you, in Nashville? Yeah. It was a student celebration, a convention, a Congress. And like a lot of places in 1906, there was a kind of a centennial of the haystack prayer meeting, of which Ryman Auditorium had one. Students were coming there, and John Selman had a vision, and his vision was, if students could go beyond their graduation and begin to look at their Christian life as missionaries or being involved, they may not have used the word on mission, but their involvement there, that would be wonderful. So this seed was popping up everywhere, to where it wasn't just a spontaneous, somebody thought of at one time. So you can see that. Okay.
Yeah, he was a businessman, as I recall.
That is correct. That was correct. And just, and I don't know how Archie got his information. There was probably a quote or something, because it basically, he kind of kept that to himself, but not really. Okay. Now, leading up to the development of the layman's missionary movement, as you all know, there has to be a things that were going on behind the scenes that were already taking place in the life of the church. Let me stop and say this, because Southern Baptists traditionally, even from their beginnings way back there in 1845, Southern Baptists believed in the autonomy of the church, and that national organizations had minimal influence. In other words, they could inspire, they could encourage, but it wasn't a top-down organization. Okay, they didn't believe in that. And frankly, you want to get Southern Baptists upset, you talk about a top-down thing. If you communication, so even today, the Southern Baptist Convention, what do? They have resolutions, they make recommendations, but technically they cannot force the church to do anything. Okay, they can disfellowship with them if they want, but people have to realize that this is still the case. And at the time this was going on, the movement was coming along and was trying to say, well, let's see what we can do about involving men without overpowering them with all kinds of stuff, to be a little bit on the crass side. This is what was going on. Mission support that was being modeled by WMU. We remember that they were founded in 1888, and there were actually women who were involved prior to 1888. But they were challenging men, because they were modeling giving to missions and being involved in mission activities. And frankly, we know that in those days, in 1907, women got most of their income from their husbands or from small jobs that they might have been doing. So the men who probably had more money and were in places of business were being challenged to their participation, giving, and involvement, just like the ladies. Okay, so that was going on. That was kind of in the background. Secondly, state conventions were realizing that men needed to mobilize. They were trying to get men, first of all, they were trying to enlist men to become missionaries, and they were trying to get men to become pastors, but they knew that not everybody's going to be a missionary or pastor. So they were saying men need to mobilize. We need men in our church, not just functioning as deacons, but we need them out there teaching Sunday school and being active just like the women are. So they were trying to get them to do that from a state level. Then you have what I call graduating students who were very involved in missions for the most part, who were coming out of their college experience with their degrees, but they wanted to continue their mission involvement. Again, Tim and I will be talking more about these things because student mission work has been going on for a long time, a very long time. So they saw this as a tie-in, so that it wasn't just for young men, but it could be going beyond their time in school. Mission opportunities for laymen widened even as far back as 1906 and 1907. The Southern Baptist Convention realized that they couldn't just get it done with the pastors and the missionaries. They had to have more involvement. And so there began to be openings up from the Foreign Mission Board and the Home Mission Board where men could participate and be a part of what the missionaries were doing. Okay. And then, as we know, men like to gather in groups. They were probably doing it in fraternities and clubs and social interaction with similar interests, vocations, skills, ideology, and world outlook. And so that all, to me, what represents the what would you call that, Tim? The not just the foundation, but what the seeds that were being planted.
The essence of what it became. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, in 1907, the movement becomes recognized. Now, Levering and Northern come along, and they met with the SBC and state leadership before the Southern Baptist Convention. The day before the convention, which I believe at that time was in May, and again, you can look this information up in Dr. Brown's material. They met the day before the convention, and Levering and Northern met with some other leadership and said, we've got, look, the Northern Baptists are doing things. Look at all these folks doing all these brotherhood and missionary movements, and we're kind of not doing anything. But we're seeing it scattered amongst the churches. Why can't we, like these other groups, form a committee and recommend a plan to create this layman's missionary movement, which it became? So an executive committee was recommended. Levering was the chairman. Northern was there. And there were actually, Tim, which I didn't know this because traditionally we all said Northern and Levering started it, which I started at. Actually, there were 6 others. There was a man from Virginia, one from Missouri, one from Tennessee, one from Texas, one from South Carolina, and one from the District of Columbia. They met and they created an executive committee that put together a motion. The motion went to the floor of the convention on May 20th by Levering to form this committee, and then it was seconded and passed. And then the full report was given at the annual meeting, which is pages 45 through 47 in Dr. Brown's book or dissertation, that presented to the convention what the committee wanted to do. It was motioned, seconded, and it passed. And so in May of 1907, the beginnings, the infancy, the birth of the layman's missionary movement was started. Okay. Now, as I've said before, ideas must be hitched as well as hatched. Now, that may not be my quote, but I have used that on many occasions. It's great to have an idea, but if it's not hooked up to anything, it really doesn't have momentum, or maybe it doesn't even get used. So again, according to Dr. Brown, Mississippi, Texas, and North Carolina were the 3 states that immediately picked up the mantle of the layman's missionary movement, and they began to utilize it within their state. You would say, well, what about the other states? Well, as you know, and Tim, you won't be surprised at this, there is a, what do they say? Sometimes it takes 3 to 5 years to say hello to Southern Baptists in the church. It takes time. And some of these folks were like, we're interested, but we don't know what it's going to cost or what it's going to involve and who's going to be doing what. So some of the states took their time, but eventually everybody got on board, because I want you to see how this will shape up in the years to come. To create an interest to the purpose of missions, they want to make men aware. Now, if you look at the 1907 terminology, they didn't use the word create interest. They used other words like arouse men to the purpose of missions.
I bet you that got some attention.
That did, but it was used for a different purpose. So I'm not trying to be funny or anything, but I changed it to create interest because I didn't want that word hanging up.
Podcast, Rob.
That's right. That's right. And there looks like there may be some duplication, but not really. But their idea was to raise funds for missions. Now, let me say about that, it was never intended for the layman's missionary movement to actually do its own fundraising or distributing funds. The idea is that they would encourage men to give to missions. And remember, this is pre-cooperative program. So they would give to the home mission board, foreign mission board, state, or through their church, or they would just give directly. Yeah. To out of their own pockets. Okay. They did talk about evangelizing the world because they had a lot of men who were traveling the world or traveling across country. And so the idea was, you don't just wear your Christianity on Sundays. You got to take it with you. And wherever you go, you need to take the gospel with you.
That's one of the things I noticed in reading the dissertation. These were, for the most part, a lot of them were businessmen who had a platform. Yes. Who were out in the world, traveling around in the marketplace.
It is. Well, and then you draw attention to the mission fields because you need to know where the deployment of Southern Baptist work is. You need to be aware of it. You need to pray for it, give to it, and then maybe even, like you said, attend, go and actually participate. Share information of the needs and conditions of the mission fields. Remember, pre-cooperative program. As you know, the foreign mission field probably got most of the attention, most of the money, but needs were everywhere, and they wanted to be at least a good communicator of what's going on in the fields, what the needs and the conditions were. Then to utilize existing organizations to distribute funds to missions needs. This is like, your Sunday school, your church, the churches themselves. And so they were not trying to create their own separate organization. Okay, for that. Okay, now, this is what's going to wrap this up a little bit for me, and I'm going to actually read you a quote because I think this is the discussion part. What brotherhood means, or what the layman's missionary movement means. It's founded now. It's there, but what's going to happen is, and it's spelled out in this dissertation. A good friend of Dr. Brown was Forrest Sawyer. I got to work with Forrest in Kentucky when I was a brotherhood intern when I was attending Southern Seminary, and Forrest at that time was the director of the Kentucky Baptist Convention, but in 1950, he was the Illinois Brotherhood secretary. He gave a quote to Archie Brown that Archie used as an introduction to his thesis. And I like this, and I want everybody to pay attention to this because it says here, a Baptist brotherhood, this is 1950, he says this, a Baptist brotherhood can be and is organized. Okay, yet, and I like that yet, circle the yet, it is, and you notice the all dark there, it is not an organization, it is a movement. And to finish this up, what I want to do is I want to share with you where this came out of. Forrest, I believe, he was not there in 1907, but he picked up the essence of this, and I just want to read this to you.
Of course, in convention style, the Southern Baptist Convention picked it up and made it into an agency.
Well, and that's part of where we're heading in this a little bit. But I want you to hear this because it says there's one statement in the 1908 annual report, because they had already been formed, and then the following year they brought their first report in 1908 to the convention that might be considered sounds negative, and Archie's talking about this. Its very mention will probably bring a smile to the faces of laymen engaged in Baptist brotherhood work today as of 1950. And it's as follows. There's two of them here. Number one, this movement is not an organization or, now get this, it is not an organization or a brotherhood, but its object is to, here's this word again, arouse and stimulate dormant forces to proper activity along the lines of missions. Number two, that broadening of its scope so as to embrace other objects weakens its efficiency and dissipates its energy. It must be specific in order to be intense. Strong businessmen cannot be enlisted if the movement becomes too general or all comprehensive. If it is encumbered with various denominational or local enterprises, it will be smothered. Here it is. Under no circumstances should it embrace more than the home and foreign mission fields. This limitation is vital to its very existence. That is the layman's missionary movement in a nutshell. Tim, what do you think?
Amazing the research that you've done. I I like the fact that we are putting together the background for people to understand if they're going to watch all these. I mean, even though I served at the Brotherhood, you served at the Brotherhood on a state level, and then later on the national level. I don't know if we taught Brotherhood history, but I'm not sure any of us did this much of a deep dive. Okay, but
And there's so much more. That's
there
what's
is so
amazing.
much more, and but we're not going to just park on this. We're going to try to get into some of the more what do you call contemporary aspects of brotherhood as well, and we're going to intermix those with some of the historic aspects of brotherhood, right,
Oh, absolutely.
as we move forward.
And that's why I think we've got to hang on to this little statement right here in blue. Even though people might argue with it, they might say, well, you know, and you kind of hinted at it where it either evolved or devolved. I'm not sure how you would put that, but obviously Sawyer was correct. It has to be organized, but is it an organization? And I think that's the debate. That is the ongoing. And will that be in the future when other movements come along that potentially can pick this up?
My perspective is, and you know, we've talked about this offline. My perspective is the Southern Baptist Convention would be better off with this, with an organization that calls itself a movement today that's long gone in a lot of quarters. I know when I left the Brotherhood in 1995, and that was a year or two before the Covenant for a New Century, or whatever they called it, that ended up merging it into the North American Mission Board and heading to Atlanta with it. Brotherhood's doing a lot of great things. In fact, the last report, as I recall, before the Covenant for a New Century came out, Brotherhood on the annual church, what do you call it, the ACP?
Yes,
the
annual church profile.
Annual church profile said that there were 1 million men and boys that were now engaged in missions through the Southern Baptist Brotherhood. And I think if we need to go back and check this, Rob,
okay,
I think that was the first time in the history of the organization that there had been that many men and boys that are that know, we could put a name, the number of men and boys involved in Southern Baptist missions through the Brotherhood is now 1 million. And that was pretty amazing. That was Dr. Jim Williams' last report, I believe, to the Southern Baptist Executive Committee.
It is interesting. And the fact that in its history, without getting into all the other aspects of it for a later podcast, we always seem to kind of run up against what they call fellowship groups, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
That kind of came out of this, because what I think, what JT Henderson and all these guys who originally set this up was, these were affinity groups that would meet together, pray, evangelize, give, as opposed to having a brother. And again, and you and I are not anti-bureaucratic. It's just, we get bogged down there so much.
Yeah. We got about 3 minutes,
okay.
3.5 minutes. Why don't you share just a little bit about where we're heading with this? I know there's a lot more history we can get into, and I know we're going to have a second part of this. Why don't you just kind of go over real quickly what we're going to be getting into in the next podcast?
Obviously, we have this little, as Archie Brown mentions it, he said, we got this infant called the layman's missionary movement. Well, it's got to grow up, and what we're watching is it's becoming of age to where, as you said, it became significant, but there were always some lingering questions about what could have happened if maybe some things could have been done a little bit differently. Again, this is not to bring excuses or point fingers, but it's to say, in the future, if this ever rises up again, which we hope it does, there may be lessons learned from our experiences through the Brotherhood Remnant to make it better, longer lasting. I had somebody tell me, Tim, 90 years is not a bad run for an organization or a movement.
No,
it's
absolutely,
but could it have gone longer if conditions were right? And I think it could have. I think there's, the bottom line is, the men at the beginning had huge amounts of support from the pastors and from the denomination. And I felt like that maybe it didn't have quite the support, or we had to generate the support more and more. We had to justify our existence. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, we did, but let's just cut to the chase. I mean, it was
You're good at that, Tim.
politics. It was politics that marginalized and ultimately killed the Brotherhood in the Southern Baptist Convention, and so often that happens. It's just so sad because I know the last few years of the Brotherhood Commission included the development of World Changers, which arguably impacted more students during that little run that it had
Yes.
than any Southern Baptist, we'll just say it, program, before or after it.
Well, think of disaster relief, another huge
And of course,
affinity group.
disaster relief would be the thing that has lived on. It was before it really latched on to Brotherhood, grew through Brotherhood, and now lives on really beyond the program of Brotherhood.
Yes.
Now, some would say that is the Brotherhood program, and I guess that argument could be made.
Well,
but at the same time, you know what I'm talking about. We got less than a minute. You want to wrap this up for us?
Well, I'm just saying that we have opened the door. We've got more to look at and peruse. We do appreciate your thoughts, comments, suggestions, ideas. We've talked about some future things. We're going to be bringing some people in that I think will help bring another perspective to this. And let's shoot for that. Remember, we're looking at it from one perspective, but there's lots more out there that we can look at.
Oh, okay, we need to go. Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Brotherhood Remnant Podcast.